Hi guys, it's Drew Brashler with DBB Audio. I am here with the Behringer Wing, and I am expanding my video series now into the 200 level. If you haven't already, make sure to start at the very beginning with my 00, which is an overview of this new console, and then starting off with the 101 series, which is going to be the basic, moving to the mid, and then later into the advanced series of this whole video tutorial series. If you haven't already, make sure to check out my blog at dbbaudio.com and like and subscribe to my YouTube channel here so you'll be up to date on the most recent videos that I'm releasing. So today on this video, we're going to be jumping into the gate section on the channel and seeing what we can do and how we can utilize it to better our mixing on the Behringer Wing. Let's dive in. So the one thing that I love using the gate on is the drums, or anything basically that I'm wanting to have automatically mute once it is not being played. For instance, if I had a vocal microphone out on stage and I was wanting that vocalist's microphone to not be going through the PA when they're not singing, I would go to a gate to do that. Additionally, we can use a gate for muting instruments when they're not being played, like the drums. For instance, the floor tom. So let's go ahead and listen to what the floor tom is actually picking up here. So there's a lot of background noise there. And if we went and EQ'd this channel to where a floor tom might be, it's getting a lot of rumbly. And so what we can do is we can utilize the gate to automatically mute all of the noise that's happening in the background when this instrument isn't being played. So let's go ahead and go to the gate and turn it on. So we have a couple different settings here. And the settings that we have is going to be our threshold. Now this is where in the volume range is this gate going to start actively applying itself, or reducing the amount of volume, or attenuating is another term to it. We can also think of a gate as being open, passing audio through it, and closed, not letting any audio through it. So let's go ahead and use the threshold to set this to a good point where we are getting just the tom hits, but nothing else. The next thing that we can see is the ratio. Now what the ratio is going to allow us to do is vary the amount of attenuation that's happening to this channel when it is approaching that threshold. So as we can see that the volume is getting closer to this threshold point, if we have a lower ratio, it's going to start letting itself through more. If we have a steeper ratio or a higher number with that ratio, it is going to completely cut out the sound until it passes that threshold point, and we can see that here. If I take the ratio to a 1.5 to 1, you can all of a sudden hear the cymbals again. If I take this all the way down to a gate, this is a physical on and off. It is either passing audio or it is not. The next thing that we have is our range, and that is how much attenuation we want to apply to this channel. So I can apply as little as 3 dB or as much as 60 dB. Now 60 would be very aggressive, so one area that I like to start out with is 30. The next thing that we have is our attack, and that is how fast is this gate going to open? How fast is the gate going to unmute itself once that volume passes that threshold point? So with most of the attacks, I typically will put these at 0. The next thing that I have is my hold time. And my hold time is going to be once that volume goes back under that threshold point, how long is this gate going to remain open until it starts attenuating? And so if we set a hold time to longer, we will notice that we have a longer amount of time before it starts attenuating. The release is how quickly is this going to completely cut out. And so we can take this release and make a more natural sounding tom point when that tom gets hit. And so we can see this at the very beginning of the song. Now, one thing that you can hear is that the snare is actually turning this on and off. And so what we can do is we can use the key filters. And what the key filter is going to allow us to do is give the gate just a very specific frequency range to listen to. And let's go ahead and try that. So we can say that we want to have a bandpass, which allows us to, one, solo, and now we can go find whatever frequency we want to be listening to. And once we have that set, we will notice that the snare drum is not opening up this gate anymore. We can try that from the beginning. So we can see that the gate is still getting hit every now and then. And that is because it's just going to have the limitations of taking the open microphone that is sitting on the floor tom and trying to apply a gate to it with keeping everything else out of the way. There is a very cool thing called a trigger that you can add to a floor tom. Pentec makes some, Roland also makes some that just clip onto the drum. And then you can additionally take that into another input on your console and have that as a trigger so that when a drummer hits that drum, it will actually send a pulse through that audio channel, which you can use with the gate. So let's go listen to what that sounds like. Pretty terrible sounding. But we can go and EQ this a little bit. So that was the sound. It was that very high frequency right in here. And we can hear that from the very beginning. That is a terrible sound, but that is what the piezo trigger is going to be listening for. And so we can actually use our gate to listen to that. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go back to my floor tom, and I'm going to go to my gate, and I'm going to turn this up. I'm going to remove my bandpass filter, and then instead of taking itself on the key source from self, I'm going to take the key source from the X floor. And we can listen to this by pressing key, and then we can go and do a bandpass. And listen to it from the beginning here. Make sure that we have it in the right spot. Perfect. So I'm going to turn off the key solo, and let's see how this performs now. So we can hear the snare drum in there, but it is no longer setting off this gate. So that's one very cool way that we can use the gate on a floor tom to just cut itself out. And now the drums will sound a whole lot more natural with this gate. Now, one very cool feature that Behringer has added on the Wing is the ability to take some plug-in emulations and actually emulate them within the channel instead of in the effects rack. And the gate is one of those areas that we can do that with. So I'm going to go ahead and select a different channel and show you those emulations now. I'm going to select my bass, and I'm going to drop down into this menu. So there are some other additional options that I have here. I have a ducker, which a ducker is basically going to attenuate its channel when a threshold is hit. And a ducker is going to be very useful when we're wanting to attenuate the bass when the kick drum is hit. And by doing that, it will allow the kick drum to come through more strong. The next thing that we have available to us is the SSL gate. This is called the Soul 9000 on the Behringer Wing, and this is emulated off the SSL 9000J series console. And this is a very great gate that you can use. The next emulation that we have is the Even 88, which is going to be an emulation of the Neve 88 RS gate. The next emulation we have is the Drawmore 241, which is going to be an emulation of the Drawmore DL241. The next emulation is the BDX902, which is a funny play on words. It is the DBX902 that it is emulated after. The next thing that we'll notice is that we actually have a few compressors in here. Now, this is a very useful thing for a person like me who wants to apply a lot of compression in multiple stages on an instrument. This is going to be useful when I have a vocal microphone where instead of applying one heavy compressor that's going to be applying 20 to 30 dB of compression by itself, we can actually break that up into smaller chunks of gain reduction over multiple compressors, giving it a more natural sound. 20 to 30 dB of compression sounds like a lot, but when you're talking about a rock vocal that maybe is going very soft in some soft points of the song and very loud in the chorus, that is a good amount of compression that we can apply to a channel for that to sit out very nicely in the mix. And to do that, we can actually utilize any of the compressors in here, like the 1176 or the LA2A, which the 1176, the 76 limiter amplifier, was called the Ultimo compressor on the X32. The LA leveler was called the Leisure compressor on the X32, which is an emulation of the LA2A. And then we come over to our source extractor. Now, this is an emulation of the Neve Portico 5045, which is a very, very cool gate. This is a very intuitive, easy gate to use, and it is very natural sounding on voice or even instruments. It's one of my favorite gates to use on any pastor microphone or any open handheld microphone where someone's speaking into. I also find it useful for any vocal microphones as a very natural sounding gate. It's a very easy to use gate in that we can set the depth of how much attenuation we want to apply. I usually start with about 10. And then we can set our threshold to where we are getting enough of our signal through or not enough of our signal through. Additionally, if we find that some of the words are getting cut off at the very beginning of the gate opening, we can switch this into a fast mode, which will help with that. The next thing that we have is our Wave Designer, which is the same plugin emulation that it was on the Behringer X32. Next, we have Auto Writer. Auto Writer is going to be an emulation of the Waves Vocal Writer, and this is going to be a very useful tool if you're wanting to automatically keep a lot of your vocals around in the same range by setting the threshold and the range and the target. It will basically apply gain or reduction to keep this vocal channel at a very consistent level. The next emulation that we have is the Sorrel Warmth Pre, which is an emulation of the SSL VHD circuit. And this is going to be a very cool way of warming up your sounds to either just a slight warmth or a full-on heavy distortion. And lastly, we come to our final emulation on the gate, which is the dynamic EQ. And this allows us one band of dynamic equalization, which basically applies a gain or a reduction of EQ to the target frequency that you want, depending on the threshold of that channel. You can also use the key source. And this is going to be very useful when you're wanting your bass guitar to have a good amount of low end, but it can duck in that one frequency area of the primary fundamental of your kick drum, which is around that 50 to 60 hertz. So what you can do is you can apply gain reduction, go find your kick drum area, and then we can pull up the key source off the kick. Anytime that the kick hits, the bass will be reduced in this frequency range by the designated amount of gain reduction that you want. It is very useful, and I'll be explaining this more in a dedicated video on the dynamic EQ. That brings me to the end of the gate section. Thank you so much for watching. My next video is going to be on the EQ section of the Behringer Wing, so stay tuned.